If you could take your seats, please, ladies and gentlemen, we'll get this show underway. Okay, good evening. Welcome to the August meeting of the Alternative Technology Association. Our presenter tonight is Rainer Korte, who is the asset management manager of ElectraNet, who manage the high voltage transmission system in South Australia. And he'll be talking to us about the grids, what has gone wrong, what the hopes for the future are, and hopefully dispelling some myths that always surround electricity generation and distribution in this state. And so, with no further ado, I'll hand over to Rainer. Please welcome Rainer.
Thank you, Alan. Nice to be with you. And as Alan said, I'm with ElectraNet. I'm part of their executive management team. I've been in the industry for quite a long time, more than 30 years now, here in South Australia. So I guess that should mean I know a few things about how the industry works. And tonight, what I was going to do, in agreement with Alan, was to just cover these broad topics. So there was a list of things that Alan suggested you might be interested to hear about, and I'm going to cover most of those, maybe not all, but my intention is to maybe speak for about 30 minutes and then leave about 15-20 minutes for questions if you have them. So I'll just say a few things quickly about ElectraNet, just so you get the context of who we are and how we fit into the electricity supply chain. I'd like to talk a little bit about just the South Australian power system and just give you a very quick overview, because I think that's important context for some of the things you're interested in. And then I'll talk about some of the recent events that we've experienced in South Australia and a little bit more generally, nationally, in the electricity market that are significant to how things are changing and some of the new challenges that we're facing in the industry that we need to learn how to manage. And I guess, as I've already said, we'll talk about some of the initiatives that are being taken to deal with those challenges. And then I'll have a few concluding messages. So I hope it'll be of interest to you. As I said, I'll try and talk reasonably quickly through a number of slides. I've used these slides to a number of audiences in recent weeks. I won't necessarily talk to everyone in detail. Happy to leave a copy of them if anyone's interested. But I think it's important to leave time at the end for questions. That's usually always a productive part. All right, so just quickly about ElectraNet. As you can see there, what we're really about is connecting generators and customers to the network. We look after the high voltage transmission network, so that takes the power from the large scale power stations to the large load centres where the distribution network that South SA Power Networks operates takes it into homes and businesses. We're a private company. The geography in South Australia you're familiar with, so our network has to cover a wide geographical area and a very dispersed, low population. So that puts South Australia at a little bit of a disadvantage when it comes to costs, network costs, because we need more infrastructure to serve the same, customer demand as, say, compared to a Victoria, which is a much more compact state. They need relatively much less infrastructure. Just this slide here just shows you the supply chain. So this is changing, of course. Historically, everything worked from left to right. We had large-scale power stations like Port Augusta, the Northern Power Station, the big gas-fired power stations at Torrens Island, and power would be transported through the transmission network, as I said before, to major load centres, and it was then distributed to homes and businesses. Now, of course, with the strong uptake of distributed renewable energy resources in people's homes and businesses, largely solar, we're now seeing energy flowing the other way. And in fact, the Australian Energy Market Operator forecasts that by the late 2020s, there will be periods of time on our transmission network in South Australia when we will have net zero demand. So even at the transmission level, there'll be times of the year, times of the day when the energy will actually flow in the reverse direction that we're used to. So that presents a whole bunch of new challenges that we've got to learn how to deal with. Just a couple of quick slides here. I just want to make the point that we've, as a business, gone to quite a lot of trouble in recent years to get more involved with customers and what they really want. So I think businesses like ElectraNet historically have been monopoly businesses, originally government owned. We're private now, but I guess the perception is, monopoly businesses not so interested in customers, or they take customers for granted. We've really tried to shift that in our business and have over the last 2 or more years now, 2 or 3 years, gone through quite an extensive customer engagement process. We have a consumer advisory panel which has quite a broad representation of end-use customers, big, small, disadvantaged, etc. And one of the things that's come out of that very strongly is that what people really are looking for is affordability, reliability, and choice. There's a network vision document on our website, and I only mention that specifically because Alan had raised it with us as he invited someone to come and speak. So that actually sets out quite some good information about how we're seeing the future, or what the future could look like, and some of the things that we've set as directions and priorities to help us in a practical way prepare for that future. The next slide I've got here just sets out, in consultation with customers and stakeholders, the vision that we came up with, which was very much to deliver affordable and reliable power that supports those customer choices for a sustainable future. And in our network vision document, we set out those 4 key themes you can see on the slide there, which very much came out of what people were telling us. So these weren't things that we came up with, but we came up with in consultation with others. And a few years ago, there was a strong sort of sense or talk that maybe there is no role for grids in the future. You know, perhaps this distributed stuff is just going to be enough. Everyone will go off grid. But that's not what we're hearing now. You know, I think that there's a lot of work being done to look out 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, including by the CSIRO and Energy Networks Australia, who've done a major piece of work that resulted in publications earlier this year that show, you know, even out to 2050, currently projections are there will still be a grid. It'll be used differently than it is today, and there's not growth so much in terms of the demand on the grid. But you know, if we're going to achieve our climate change targets that the Commonwealth has committed to in the Paris Agreement, etc., you know, then we do need large-scale renewable resources to be able to do that. Small-scale renewable resources on their own are just not going to develop quickly enough, or there's not going to be enough volume of them to actually make the change to a lower carbon future that we need. So that if you have large-scale wind, large-scale solar, large-scale anything, you know, you're still going to need some form of grid to transport that energy around and get it to where it can be utilised. I won't call out those other things, you've probably run your eye over them. Look, let me just take a few minutes to talk about and give you a brief overview of the South Australian power system. So you can see there on the map ElectraNet's, or South Australia's transmission network, very long and spindly. I guess some of the things that characterise the power system in South Australia are that we have, first of all, world-leading levels of integration of intermittent renewable energy resources, wind and solar, very high levels. You know, we now have 40 to 45% of South Australia's energy needs are met by wind and solar. The last coal-fired power station closed last year. We have a very strong reliance now on gas. There's no more coal, so the only non-intermittent resource that we have at the moment in South Australia, a major resource for generating energy, is based on gas. And as you're probably aware, there isn't an overabundance of gas available for use to generate electricity. There's a bit of a scarcity, and it's driven prices up. The government has therefore sought to incentivise more gas to be made available. I'll come back to that. Of course, there's been some recent events, the most infamous being the 28th of September last year, when we experienced a system black event in South Australia. So that has, I think, very much brought back to the fore. Yes, we're very concerned about higher pricing, or the level of pricing, but we're also very much concerned about reliability and the security of the power system. So I guess that was a sort of a bit of a wake-up call, I think, for the general community. Let's not forget about the importance of reliability. So new measures are being introduced to deal with some of the new challenges that are coming. And I think that the path we're on, you know, is only going to continue. We'll see more and more renewable energy, intermittent renewable energy, and we need to find ways of firming that up and dealing with the system security challenges that arise from those higher penetration levels. This chart just shows you in the last 6 months of last year, so this is July to December 2016, how our electricity generation capacity was made up. So the top bar there is capacity, and it shows you there that we have about 2,700 megawatts of gas-fired generation at that time, and about 1,600 megawatts of wind, about 700 megawatts of solar. The next chart I have just puts that into a little bit of context and perspective. So if you have a look just at the left-hand side of that chart for a minute, and I'll just make the point that's under the heading there first. I think a lot of people have said that some of the issues we're seeing in South Australia with system security and reliability are as a result of high penetration of renewable energy. But it's not that on its own. It's that combined with the fact that we're weakly interconnected with a bigger system. So South Australia is quite a small power system, and we really don't have any significant system security issues as long as we remain connected to the bigger system through the interconnectors that we have with Victoria. So as long as we're part of the bigger NEM, then if you have a disturbance on the power system, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute, what that means, then you can ride through that. It's just a little ripple. But if we lose the connection with the other states, that in itself can be a major disturbance that you have to be able to survive. And then if you have to operate as an islanded system while we put the whole thing back together, then a disturbance will make a much bigger ripple because it's a smaller system that you're dealing with. So it's those two things together, weakly interconnected and high penetration of intermittent renewables. If you look on the left-hand side of that chart, the maximum demand for electricity from the grid in South Australia is about 3,100 megawatts now. On average, though, the demand is only about 1,200 to 1,500 megawatts. So it's about half, less than half. And the minimum demand is as low as 800 megawatts now, and it's getting lower and lower. And the reason it's getting lower and lower is because minimum demand used to be at night, overnight, when no one was using much power, but now minimum demand, is actually in the middle of the day, on a hot day when the sun's shining and all of those solar panels are generating a lot of electricity. So we're now seeing that minimum demand going down and down and down as more and more renewables come on. And that presents, again, new challenges that we have to deal with to ensure the stability and security of the system overall. The right-hand chart there, just to finish that, we have 1,600 megawatts of wind I'm showing there on the system at the moment, approximately. But as that note says there, we have 220 megawatts of wind farms actually committed, signed up. They're not operating yet. They will be shortly in the coming year or so. And we also, as you might have heard in the media, we have now 200 megawatts or so, 220 megawatts of large-scale solar plants that are also signed up. So if you add all that up, what that's telling you is that the amount of solar and wind capacity that we have to generate electricity, which is intermittent at the moment, far exceeds our average demand levels in the state. We're talking now in excess of 2,000 megawatts there when average demand is about 1,500. So that, coupled with the weak interconnection with the eastern states, is what is presenting some new challenges for us. I should just make the point on the right-hand side of that slide there that if you compare us with Denmark is often talked about as also having a very high penetration of wind energy. So they also have more than 40% of their energy comes from wind. So similar to South Australia, we're in the 40s as well. But the big difference for them is that they can cover about 80% of their peak demand with interconnectors with Sweden, Germany and Norway, I think, are the three countries. Whereas, we can only cover about 30% of our peak demand through imports from Victoria. So that just goes to that weakly interconnected point that I was making. This next slide just shows you, again, how the generation mix in South Australia is changing. So the top curve there is showing how what we call synchronous generation is reducing. Now, just need to quickly explain that term for people that may not know. So synchronous generation refers to the big coal-fired or gas-fired generators, that are rotating plants. The new type of technology, like wind farms and solar farms, etc., are connected to the system asynchronously through inverters. So it's a different technology, and they don't sort of form part of maintaining the whole security of the system currently in the way that these synchronous generators do. So one of the biggest problems we're facing is having less and less of the traditional generators operating, which have traditionally provided additional services to provide and maintain power system security. So you will often hear people talk about things like inertia, which is just a rotating mass. So, we also talk about system strength, or for the electrical engineers, fault levels. These are all concepts that are actually important to maintaining the stability of the power system. So as we have less and less of these generators operating that used to provide that service, and the new ones don't, we're getting into dangerous territory where we need to ensure that new initiatives are put in place and measures are taken to fill those gaps. This slide here, if maybe just focus on the left-hand side for tonight, the point I'm just trying to make here is that another implication of the changing generation mix in the state is that we now have much more variability in our operating conditions. So if you have a look here, we're talking about 2 days in July this year. 15th of July at the bottom left, we had a very low wind day. And on the 18th of July, just 3 days later, we had a record wind day, where for wind generation at least, we actually recorded 1,493 megawatts of wind generation, instantaneous wind generation. So what this is saying is, the system was designed for a different world. We're now seeing much more variability. That means it's much more important you can forecast that variability accurately. If you can't forecast the variability accurately, then it can lead to not having enough resources on to meet demand. And that's effectively what happened on the 8th of February this year, when AEMO, the Australian Energy Market Operator, actually just didn't quite get the forecast right. There was a very big variability in operating conditions on that day, and there were some issues with the Pelican Point power station. They couldn't get it on time, and they had to instruct 45 minutes of load shedding here in South Australia because we just didn't have enough energy to meet the peak demand. And that was at least a contributing factor to that was just the greater variability that we're now experiencing. It makes it more difficult to actually forecast. A lot of energy, AEMO is putting a lot of resources into improving its forecasting ability, but it is a challenging environment we're now in. Before I go on, just one quick slide here for those that may not be familiar. There are a number of organisations I'm talking about here that are part of the applicable regulatory framework for energy, or for electricity in particular in South Australia. So on the left-hand side, we have some national bodies. We have the Australian Energy Market Commission that makes the rules under which the national electricity market operates, that govern the market. AEMO, I've mentioned, the Australian Energy Market Operator responsible for operating the power system and also the wholesale electricity market. And the Australian Energy Regulator is the regulator that sets revenues for network businesses and also enforces the national electricity rules. On a state level, we have the Essential Services Commission, which also has a role to play in setting the reliability standards that apply for transmission networks, particularly on the for transmission networks and also for the distribution network. And the Office of Technical Regulator is responsible for safety and technical regulation in the industry. So let's get on to some recent events. So many of these will be familiar to you. So starting on the 9th of May last year, I've already mentioned the Northern Power Station closed, taking out nearly 550 megawatts of brown coal fired generation. 28th of September, the system black event. I won't talk more about that now, but if anyone asks a question later, I'm happy to respond to it. 8th of February, we had that 45-minute load shedding event I mentioned a moment ago during heat wave conditions. On the 14th of March, that event on the 8th of February was very significant because it was really the straw that broke the camel's back for the South Australian government that forced them to act or prompted them to act. They brought out their energy plan on the 14th of March, and I'll cover that a little further shortly. On the 30th of March this year, the Hazelwood Power Station in Victoria closed, taking out another 1,600 megawatts of generation. Now, I think that was significant also because up to that time, the issue of high prices was very much a South Australian issue, and all of these issues around security and reliability. Once Hazelwood closed, the markets shifted, and now we're seeing high wholesale market prices in Victoria as well, and New South Wales. And so now it's becoming more of a national problem. On the 2nd of June, I've just included a little quote there because I think this is illustrative of what a lot of people have been talking about. This came out of a report by the Australian Energy Market Commission and the Climate Change Authority, and it just calls out this issue that we've had in policy land for some time now, where energy policy and carbon abatement or climate policy, just have not meshed, and there has been no coordinated policy direction from government. And that really has led to uncertainty for investors, and it's still a problem that hasn't been solved. On the 9th of June, Dr. Alan Finkel, the Chief Scientist of Australia, released his final report that had been commissioned by the Council of Australian Governments into the future security of the national electricity market. On the 6th of July, the South Australian Government made its big announcement about the 100 megawatt battery to be built near Jamestown in the mid-north. On the 14th of July, the COAG Energy Council met to consider the recommendations made by Alan Finkel, and they accepted 49 of the 50 recommendations. The one that's still being considered and debated is the clean energy target. And of course, we heard some pronouncements immediately after that COAG Energy Council meeting that some of the states, the Labor states, were going to look further into this matter and, if necessary, go it alone and consider implementing a clean energy target by themselves. On the 1st of August, so just about every time I give a presentation like this, I've got to add something else at the bottom here. On the 1st of August, the South Australian Government announced a long-term backup power plant to also be in place by the 1st of December. So this combined two elements of its energy plan that was announced back in April. One was to have emergency diesel generation in place for the summer as an energy security measure. And the second was that they were going to have their own 250 megawatt gas-fired power plant that was acknowledged would take a little longer. So they've brought those two things together now. So they're actually leasing 9 diesel gen sets that can also run on gas. They'll lease them for 2 years and then have the option to actually bring them together, co-locate them near a gas supply source, and run them as an emergency gas generator. So these are some of the events that we've seen occur in recent times. Now, I just want to maybe give you, if it's of interest, hopefully a little bit of a sort of a 101 on frequency control and some of these system security matters that I've been talking about briefly. So this system security issue, requires new measures, as I've said. Last year, the South Australian government started out by introducing a new standard for the rate of change of frequency. So usually only engineers would use this language. They'd talk about rock-off. But now you even hear politicians talk about rock-off. So that just shows you the sort of world we're in. So rock-off stands for rate of change of frequency. And why is that important? Well, when we talk about stability on a power system as far as frequency control, I guess most of us will be familiar, that our power system runs to a frequency of 50 hertz. And a power system, up to now at least, there has not been the ability to store large amounts of energy. I mean, that's starting to change. But so we have to match supply and demand, on a minute-by-minute basis. If we have a mismatch between supply and demand, then the frequency of the system increases or decreases. So if you have a large disturbance and you lose a large amount of load or demand, or you lose a large amount of generation or supply, you create a large imbalance. So if supply is more than demand, the whole system will speed up, the frequency goes up. If the supply is less than the demand by a significant amount, then the whole thing starts to slow down. And so what's wrong with that? Well, we have to actually control the power system within certain limits. Otherwise, the equipment that's connected to it won't continue to operate as designed. So if the frequency goes outside of acceptable limits, then generators will start tripping off and the whole thing will start going down the tube. It would go black. So this is important. Now, the rate of change of frequency is increasing because we have less and less synchronous generators on, which have that inertia, that rotating mass. So if you have less and less of that, that inertia is like a resistance to fast changes in frequency. If you have less and less of it, the frequency can change quicker and quicker. And if it moves quickly enough, then it will move so fast that our normal emergency control systems that we have in place won't work. So, for example, one of the emergency control schemes we have in place to deal with the sort of issues I'm talking about is called under-frequency load shedding. So all of the suburbs in South Australia are on a list, and if the frequency goes low enough, they're automatically tripped off to help the whole system survive. So it's better to lose a bit of load, lose some customers and help the whole system survive than to have everything lost. So that's a traditional emergency control scheme that you have in place, under-frequency load shedding. But that requires time to act. If you have the rate of change of frequency so fast that it actually bypasses that emergency control system, it's too fast for it to act, then it can't help you to have the power system survive and things will go black. And that's essentially what happened on the 28th of September last year. Right, we had a very severe weather event. It knocked over some transmission towers in the mid-north. That in itself should not have caused a system black event. Okay, but what happened was those towers...
Excuse me.
I'll continue on. You didn't even give me a chance to finish. All right. For the rest of you who are interested, so the transmission towers went down, and what happened then is they created a number of voltage depressions. So the wind farms, there was a bunch of wind farms in the mid-north of the state who saw those voltage depressions, and they had a software setting, and this is all public knowledge, right? It's all written up in AEMO's reports on the event. They had a software setting that actually limited the number of voltage depressions they were willing to withstand. And nobody knew about those settings. The wind farms didn't know about them, AEMO didn't know about them, we didn't know about them. So they had like a number, it was like 10, let's say 6. After 6 voltage depressions within a 30-second period or something like that, then they just switched off. And so because of that, that then created one of these big mismatches between supply and demand that I talked about, because we lost about, I can't remember the exact numbers, but about 300 megawatts, say, of generation in the mid-north. So that what happens then is, because we've got this interconnector with the eastern states, it will try to pick up the balance. So it started to try and import 300 megawatts more. But because it was already importing at a high level, close to its capacity, the 300 megawatts extra tipped it over its capacity, and it switched out to protect itself and the system as a whole. Once that had happened, we didn't just have a mismatch of 300 megawatts. The interconnector I'm talking about has a capacity to import power up to 600 megawatts. So once it tripped out, we then lost another 400 or 500 megawatts, and we had a very large mismatch between supply and demand. And the rate of change of frequency got as high as 7 or 8 hertz per second, using the technical language, which is much more. Coming back to my slide, the South Australian government last year, as a result of all of this, set a limit and said we don't want the rate of change of frequency to go higher than 3 hertz per second. On the 28th of September, it went up to 8. So this is a measure, a new measure. It was never an issue before, but because of the new environment now of the power system, the changing generation mix, this is an example of a new issue that we have to deal with. On the 12th of October, they introduced this measure, and later that year in December, the Australian Energy Market Operator also introduced a new measure to require always to have 2 synchronous generators online at any time. And this was to address another technical issue that's new now that we need to deal with, and that is to ensure there's sufficient system strength or fault levels on the system. If you don't have enough or sufficient system strength or fault levels, then what can happen is asynchronous generators like wind farms, solar farms, and even traditional generators can actually fail to ride through faults and trip off, which again is a system security risk. And even the protection systems that are on our networks that have to be able to differentiate between a normal operating condition and one that is a fault condition, where there's something wrong, so they can then act to protect the system or protect people from a safety perspective. If they can't actually distinguish anymore because the fault levels are too low, then that's a problem. So I'm just giving you hopefully the sort of layman's version here, but I'm just trying to give you some insights that we do have some new challenges that arise from this strong push to renewables. It's not an issue in itself. These are things that can be managed, but they do need to be managed, and if they're not managed, they can lead to broader issues on the power system. So I won't dwell on this. I think I've given you the long story already, but this was a chart that AEMO showed around the country last year, back in about August, September, and it was what got the attention of the South Australian government, because what it was showing, it's showing 2010 down to 2015, 2016, and the orange is saying, okay, red flag, orange flag. If we had a very unlikely event occur, like losing the Hayward interconnector, which is 2 wires on single towers, so it's low risk that you're going to lose it, but it does happen about once every sort of 5 years or so on average. Then there is a risk you may be in an operating condition where the system would actually not be able to survive from a security perspective. And the policymakers, of course, thought, well, hang on, if you're telling me there's a real risk here, I need to be seen to be doing something about that. And that's what led to this introduction of the 3 hertz per second rock-off limit. Look, this chart is just showing rate of change of frequency, the 50 hertz. What happens if you had a loss of generation and things slow down. I think I've already talked enough about those concepts, so I'm going to skip over that. I mentioned earlier the South Australian government releasing, yes. Sure. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I sort of showed the supply chain, but I didn't talk about, I guess, exactly the individual roles there. We're a transmission network service provider, so we're not involved in the energy market at all. We're just providing a transport mechanism. So basically, the Australian Energy Regulator sets our allowable revenue over a 5-year period. We're currently going through one of those processes. If you look on our website, if you're interested, or on the AR's website, you'll be able to find all of the information around that. Yeah, I'm getting to that. Very impatient. So the AR will set the amount of revenue that we can earn, and we recover that revenue through the customers that are connected to our network. So that's just the big customers. So we have probably about a dozen large customers. So like BHP Billiton at Olympic Dam, right? Or the Roseworthy bottling plant. We have only a few handful of large customers, and then the rest of it is all recovered from SA Power Networks, who is the distributor that's connected, taking demand from most of our connection points, and they then recover it through their distribution charges from end-use customers. So most customers, even SA Power Networks, there's a threshold above which, if you take that much demand, so it's larger sort of larger business and industrial customers, they get the transmission costs passed through to them directly. So it's a locational price. They'll see it on their bill. For everyone else, like you and me at home, we just have it smeared with our average pricing that comes through our retailer.
The question I've got is where's the dividing line between yourselves, ElectraNet, and say SA Power Networks?
Yep.
Where does that sort of change over?
Okay, well our network is at 2700 5 kV, 132 and 66, and they're the lower voltage. So for everyone else, we own the highways, if you like, the freeways, and they own the smaller roads that, in the neighbourhoods and the suburbs. Okay, yep. That'd be about right. There's a lot more distribution network out there than transmission network. What's the question?
Well, the point is that obviously there's more out there than needs to be.
Or how do you figure that? Just from...
What the value is,
yeah.
it has to be more than what's needed.
Well, I think you'd have to... I don't think you can determine that just on a value, I'm sorry. Look...
He thinks that to help consumers that they should actually look at reassessing the asset value.
Yeah, there has been talk about that. What I suggest we do, because I think we're starting to get into question time here, which I'm happy to stop here and have questions, but I do have a bit more if people are interested for me to keep going for the moment. Okay. All right, just the government's energy plan. We've talked about, there are 6 elements of that plan, which are just briefly shown on the right-hand side at the bottom there. The state power station I referred to earlier, the big battery, a private power station, mentioned that as well. They've allocated a small amount of money to try and get more gas available. They've given themselves special powers to be able to act in emergencies, and the energy security target, which is an interesting one, because what that is essentially doing is prioritising local higher priced gas generation compared to cheaper power from interstate. Look, I haven't got too many more slides, but just to round out the story here, there's a lot of review going on at the moment about how do we deal with some of these new issues I've introduced. The Australian Energy Market Commission released a final report just in June on its System Security Market Frameworks review, and at the same time it released 2 draft rules. I think these are probably of less interest here, so I'll skip over these, and those that are interested can look at the slides later. I'll just highlight a few things that ElectraNet's doing to try and help us in our transformation to this new world. So one of the things we're having a look at is whether we should have stronger interconnection between South Australia and the eastern states. I mentioned before, if you remember, that some of the challenges we're facing are a combination of high penetration renewables and being weakly interconnected. So we're having a look, is there an economic case? Is it in the interests of customers, which is what a positive economic case means by definition, to actually increase the strength of interconnection, another interconnector? Because what that would mean then is that the likelihood of ever being separated from that bigger system would be much, much lower. The risk would be far reduced. And as I said earlier, we don't have a system security issue as long as we're connected to the biggest system. We're also having a look at supply options on the Eyre Peninsula. Of course, there's a lot of interest over there. We're looking at large-scale battery storage ourselves as well. So the government 100 megawatt battery's been announced. We've been doing work for some time, which is available in the public domain, looking at a 30 megawatt battery also in the mid-north on the Yorke Peninsula. So there hasn't been a final announcement about that yet, but I'm expecting there might be one quite soon. So look out for that. We're also exploring the role of some old technology called synchronous condensers. So this is essentially spinning machines that have a rotating mass and can help with inertia and system strength, but they don't actually generate power. So they used to be used a lot decades ago, and now they're sort of coming back into fashion, if you like, as a way of dealing with some of these new issues. So we're having a look there, working with the Australian Energy Market Operator, the South Australian Government and others, to see whether we need to be deploying some of these in our state. And finally, we're looking at a special protection scheme, which is an emergency control scheme to try, and we're looking to have this in place by summer. And the idea of this would be to seek to detect when there's a, I'm talking now at a sub-second level, detect when there's a risk of separating the power system from the big one. And if that looks like it's going to happen, then taking quick action, which could be either injecting power from batteries quickly to reduce the mismatch between supply and demand, or shedding load quickly, again to reduce the imbalance, to prevent that separation from happening. And if we can't act quickly enough for that to happen, this would all happen automatically, then to act after the event to ensure the islanded system can operate in a secure manner. I'll just move faster here now. The interconnector investigation we're looking at is really being driven by 4 objectives. One is to improve competition in the wholesale electricity market in South Australia. If you open wider pipes interstate, you can then have more competition coming in the wholesale electricity market, which should put a downward pressure on price. Improving system security, improving the diversity of electricity supply, which gives greater energy security, and of course helping to open up again the state to development of more renewable energy resources and helping that transition to meeting Australia's renewable energy targets. In this investigation, we're not just looking at network investment opportunities, which is what a new interconnector would be, but also non-network alternatives. And those would include things like contracting with either traditional or new generators, new technology generators, or large-scale battery storage could provide some of the system security benefits of a new interconnector as well. We're having a look at the option of a new interconnector between South Australia and Victoria New South Wales and Queensland, and looking at really a very broad range of options, long and short, small capacity, big capacity, relatively small costs to larger cost. And if something was proven to be economic, then we could have something in place by the early 2020s. Just to emphasise here, no investment occurs in the transmission network of this nature without intensive scrutiny. It's a very transparent process that we have to go through with regulatory oversight, and no investment takes place unless it's deemed to be in the best interests of customers, right? The benefits have to outweigh the costs. This slide here, I won't dwell on it for this audience, but for those that are interested, might want to have a look at it later. The economic cost-benefit test that applies to networks in the national electricity market is called the Regulatory Investment Test for transmission networks. And it's, as I said, a very public process. It commences with us publishing a consultation report. For this exercise, we did that back in November last year. So you'll find that on our website as given on this slide pack. We got over 30 submissions to this process. We're currently in the process of going through and doing our analysis, looking at the various options, looking at the future scenarios. Of course, because the future is uncertain, we have to ensure that we look at a wide range of possible futures and test the options we're considering against those possible futures to ensure we get a robust outcome. There'll be a draft report published later this year in probably November, another opportunity for consultation, and then a final report next year. So that's the timing I've given there. So just my last slide here. Just before the COAG Energy Council met, that I referred to earlier, Audrey Ziebelman, who's the new Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Energy Market Operator, was quoted in the media as saying what you've just read on the screen there. She was really, I think, trying to encourage the ministers when they met in the next day or two at that time to really get serious about considering Alan Finkel's recommendations. And she talked of, if there's continues to be a policy vacuum of consequences too awful to contemplate in terms of more blackouts, higher energy prices, etc. As I said earlier, 49 of the 50 recommendations were accepted. I think one of the points I've tried to get across tonight is that as we see more and more take-up of renewable energy, we will see, less and less traditional energy or generators that have provided those stability services historically. So we need new ways of providing those. And for example, AEMO has a trial underway which is partly funded by the Australian Renewable Energy Agency with the Hornsdale Wind Farm in the mid-north. Some of you may have seen there was again a media announcement about that this month where they're trying out some new ways of actually having a wind farm to be scheduled by AEMO to provide frequency control services or stability services. So trying to, I guess what I'm saying is while the new technology, wind and solar plants at the moment don't tend to provide those services, perhaps they can if we put the right controls, the right smarts on them. And there's a bit of a trial happening to try and explore that with AEMO at Hornsdale. New technology like large-scale battery storage, I think, has an important role to play in the future network. And that's one of the reasons that we're keen to try that out as well and having a look at that. And of course, South Australia, again, is going to be very much at the forefront of trialling large-scale battery storage with the government's plant, and the one that we hopefully will be announcing shortly as well. An increasing proportion of intermittent generators will be facilitated by a stronger interconnected network because it provides more diversity, and I think that's something we'll continue to explore. And the last point there is, as I said at the beginning, I've been in the industry for 30 plus years. it is certainly a very interesting time at the moment, full of challenge but also opportunity, and the pace of change is like we've never seen it before, and that makes for a very interesting time for all of us. Thank you. I'll leave it there. I'm happy if there's time for questions. Right, hands going up everywhere.
The wind on the 28th of September blew down those pylons. Obviously, when they were built, according to engineering standards, we never expected to get winds that strong. So the standards in South Australia, because we're not a hurricane area,
Yep.
weren't that big. We didn't have to have really big, thick ones like perhaps they do in the tropics. So given that only 20 of them blew down, what about the rest of them? How do they all have to be reinforced, given that we are going to get strong winds from now on? Or how are we going to make them stronger?
Well, that's a great question. So let me share a couple of things with you very quickly. You're absolutely right. Obviously the transmission lines in South Australia have been built over many decades. So we have some, that were built in the 60s, that were built to older standards. But those were, or the impact on those was not a problem for the 28th of September. The towers that blew over on the 28th of September that actually made a difference for the event were actually ones that were built in the 1980s and very much to modern day standards. And we have never had a failure on any of those towers ever before. So that just shows the extremity of the event that occurred. No, the 80s, of course. Yeah. So it just was a very extreme event. But you've got to also understand that if you've got a transmission line from point A to point B, there'll be, say, hundreds of towers on that line, maybe over a couple of 100 kilometres. So it was very strong tornado activity that blew over a few of these key towers. And tornadoes are typically very localised. They have a very narrow path. So it was just bad luck, really, on that day that a couple of tornadoes tracked directly across some towers. You could have a tornado that actually goes between two adjacent towers and would have no impact. But these are built to reasonable standards. Now, we had a look immediately after the event. We actually had a look at the mid-north, and we asked ourselves the question, is there a risk here of multiple lines falling over? Because the other thing you've got to think about is if you've got multiple lines going between point A and point B, if one falls over, it doesn't matter because you've still got three more. And the way you design your network is that you allow for redundancy. So you allow for the fact that a line may be out of service for whatever reason. It might be for planned maintenance. It might be because it's fallen over or whatever because of a tornado. So look, I think the reality here is we're actively looking. We continue to look at this. But if people said all of a sudden, well, we want to actually now build stronger towers throughout our network, you're talking about billions of dollars of investment, and that's not going to help your price. Okay.
I've got a question on the interconnectors. So
Yep.
your business is distribution. So you grow your business, you grow your distribution capacity. I'm not too sure how much of your network is pure distribution and is interconnectors. But you said the economics behind interconnectors was transparent, so there has to be this process of consultation. Then you put up figures for plans you might have for what you might do with connecting to Victoria, New South Wales. And it said what could be 500 million or 2.5 billion.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite rubbery. All due respect, that's fairly rubbery kind of area. I'm trying to get some fix on the economics of interconnectors. And the other follow-up is if you lost an interconnector that was a big one to Hayward, deal, would it not be economically worthwhile saying, well, okay, if the generation of Hayward is gone, still get that interconnector to pick up supply from the rest of Victoria and keep that interconnector going? That could be the most naive question you've ever heard. But that's where I'm going.
Sure. Well, look, if the slide I had up there is just options that we had in our consultation report that we published in November, right? So when we get to a draft report at the end of the year, that will actually say, look, we've looked at all these options, and it'll have a lot more detail, and it'll say, this is the one, you know, and you'll be able to see the analysis. This is the one that sort of looks like coming out on top. If you're interested, there's a lot of stuff we've already published on this. Have a look at our website. I think the principle here is that you know, we are on one major interconnector. There is another DC interconnector, different technology, that goes through the Riverland, but that's of relatively small capacity and doesn't have a lot of bearing on the sort of stability issues we're talking about here. So, you know, it makes sense to me. We build for redundancy through our main network. Having a redundant interconnector, larger capacity, will help security. But I think the other thing I haven't mentioned is increasingly you're going to see energy imported out of South Australia. Okay, up to now we have imported power from Victoria when we need it. That's what I meant to say if I didn't. Okay, we'll see more power exported out of South Australia because we've got just so much renewable energy resource now.
All of that, but you say redundant. So is the Hayward interconnector now redundant? It's gone.
No.
Hazelwood, sorry.
Hazelwood is the power station. Hayward is the interconnector.
Oh, okay, is that what you were mixing up? Sorry. Okay, all right, I get it. Okay. All right, let's go for one at the back.
From my understanding, we've spent or committed about $3 billion in large-scale renewables in the state at the moment. If we took that same $3 billion and put it into residential, as in solar, flow battery storage, that would take approximately 240,000 houses off the grid. And you've still got your robustness to support your industry. Why aren't we considering options like that? It's about 20 to 25,000 to take an average house off the grid using flow battery technology and solar.
Sure. Look, I've got two thoughts on that, and I'm not an expert in this area necessarily, but I can tell you two things. One, if you're interested in this, have a look at, I'm not sure I had a reference in this slide pack, but I mentioned earlier the CSIRO and Energy Networks Australia did a very major piece of work called the Network Transformation Roadmap, which was published earlier this year in final form. And there's a really a lot of good resource information there. Now, two things come out of that for me. One is people can go off the grid now, and they do, and they are. But it's actually not a rational economic decision on their part because, you know, yes, it makes sense to put solar panels on your roof. Yes, it makes sense to get a battery in your garage. But it also makes sense to stay connected to the grid because if you don't, you actually need a bigger battery. You need bigger solar panels to give you the same level of reliability that you would if you stay connected to the grid. So it's less efficient for you. Now, some people will make that choice because they just have a philosophical desire, you know, to get off the grid. But it's actually not a sensible commercial decision.
I disagree because if the government and private enterprise had the same money as what we're doing on large scale, we would have already nearly half the state off of the grid.
Yeah.
So it is because then people no longer pay for electricity.
Yeah.
So we have a stronger economic community.
Sure. Well, look, I won't debate it with you, but look at the numbers because the numbers will just tell you that I'm not talking about the numbers now from an industry perspective, but from an individual perspective. If I as a consumer, if I as a consumer look at two scenarios, if I look at one, I'm going to have solar panels and battery storage to be as self-sufficient as I possibly can. And scenario A is I do that and I stay connected on the grid, or scenario B is I do that but I cut the tie to the grid. Then when I cut the tie to the grid, I just need I need to spend more money to get the same level of reliability, and it doesn't make sense for me to do it. Yeah.
Spends our money to do this.
Yeah.
What's happening?
Yeah.
You know, they've just committed nearly $1 billion.
Yeah.
So $1 billion
Yeah.
is 80,000 houses off the grid, which will give instantaneous, and that can be done in 1 year.
Yeah.
That gives an instantaneous economic benefit to the state.
Yeah. We're not going to resolve this here.
Doesn't.
We're not going to resolve this here. Can I just add one more thought to just answer your query? The other thing I would just observe is, and again, I'm not an expert here, but I'm just taking the advice of experts. The CSIRO and this study I mentioned will tell you that if you look, particularly the CSIRO and also ARENA, I've heard Ivor Frischnet, the CEO of ARENA, say this many times. If you look at all the rooftops of all the dwellings in Australia and you maximise solar panels on all of them, you're not going to get anywhere near the amount of renewable energy that we need to meet our carbon abatement targets. Right? So you actually need more than that. You need large-scale renewables as well. And that's the point I was making earlier in the presentation.
That's true. We've got 25% of rooftops have 800 megawatts. You said all the rooftops.
Yeah.
That would give us 3,200 megawatts. Sure, it's only 2,000 hours, but you haven't counted industry rooftops and all the commercial buildings out there. So,
well, I'm just quoting studies that have been done, so if you want to have a look at them, I'm not in a position to debate it with you. They're not my studies. Okay.
Last week, the government announced that they were going to build the solar thermal plant up in Port Augusta. And I hadn't seen anything in your presentation that actually indicated how your network would work with that. But my understanding, and I'm not an engineer, is that it would provide synchronous power because it behaves very much like a coal farm.
That's correct. That's correct.
So how would your network benefit once this comes online in 3 years' time?
Yeah. Well, look, the solar thermal power plant will behave and provide the sort of services just like a traditional generator. So, you know, that technology is overcoming some of the issues and deficiencies that I talked about earlier. So that will provide, as the government's been saying, baseload power can be there 24/7, and so it does provide some of that. So that's a great initiative to try here. Yeah.
I wanted to ask about the price differential. So you're in the business of shipping large amounts of energy, either from one state to another or from the top of the system down to a distributed level. And if we're going for a paradigm where it could all be distributed, we wouldn't need you at all.
That's right.
So what is the price differential that you rely on to be able to justify your investments?
Well, I'm not sure I'm quite getting the price differential you're referring to.
So to do your economic RIC you need a price differential across a period of time to justify that you're going to be able to justify that investment.
Are you talking about the time period over which we would look at that?
I'm talking about the price differential you look for before there's even a market worth doing.
Well, the way any economic assessment works is you look at the options you're looking to invest in. It doesn't matter whether you're investing in transmission networks or a motor vehicle or whatever. All right, you'll look at what are the options I've got. You're going to look at the time, the life of the investment. You're going to look at the costs and benefits, and you're going to weigh them up over that time period, over maybe a range of futures. That's how it's done. So right now, when we're looking at investment in the network, we will look at non-network alternatives. So, for example, at Port Lincoln, if you look at our investigation on the Eyre Peninsula, One of the feedbacks we've got on our consultation report there, because we have to spend money on an old line that was built in the 50s or 60s, we're now needing to start to spend significant amounts of money on the conductor because it's starting to wear out. We also have a set of diesel generators owned by a generator at Port Lincoln that provide backup power. That contract runs out at the end of next year. This now gives us a chance to have a look. Can we avoid the cost of that generation, which is quite expensive? Can we avoid the cost of repairing the new line? Would it be actually more cost effective to build a new line? Now, another alternative there would be why not get rid of the line altogether and just have local generation at Port Lincoln, rely on the wind, the solar, have a little microgrid. But when we look at that, it doesn't stack up. It's not actually cost effective yet. That's how an economic assessment works.
Some time back, we were talking from SA Power Networks. They expect the battery prices that are sold to come down to about 15 cents a kilowatt hour. How is the grid going to compete with that?
How is...
That is on par with what SA Power Networks
Yep.
is for their distribution.
Yep.
So it's been referred to as a death spiral, I think.
Yep. There was a lot...
I can see the future for ElectraNet, for high voltage transmission. But is that Power Networks? I think particularly in the rural areas where there are long distribution lines with relatively few customers, they're not losing money.
Yeah.
How would you manage those in rural areas?
Yeah. Well, I think that's where you'll first start to see those sort of effects occurring. So even on our network, I don't think it's rocket science to sort of consider that on the extremities of our network. I showed you that map before. We've got long, thin lines going up to Lee Creek. We've got the line going down to Port Lincoln. Port Lincoln's probably not quite there, but you would probably never end up replacing that line to Lee Creek. If in the end, if you had to spend major dollars on it, it would be more economic to provide the power up there through local generation, through maybe a combination of diesel, battery, solar, etc. So it's at the extremities of the grid those economics will stack up first for the major networks. So we actively look at that as well. Obviously, you want to do what makes sense. Okay. There's three in a row here.
When it was first deregulated, we had generators and retailers separated. They sort of became gentailers
Yep.
and turned Torrens Island into a hedge system. We started off with a price of vol at $20,000 per megawatt hour, dropped it to $14,000 per megawatt hour. The distributed energy groups, green groups, are wanting to drop it to $2,000 to bring more competition of distributed generation into the market to be able to have lower energy prices. I think the argument for $14,000 is system security. Do you support the high price of gold for system security?
Okay. Well, look, I don't necessarily support or not support, but let me just give you some insight. We have an energy-only market. That's a market design sort of question for the national electricity market. So what that means is we only pay generators for the energy that they produce. And so the theory then is how the market would work is that obviously as you have more scarcity of supply, the price needs to go up to provide a signal for new capacity to come into the market. And that's why in an energy-only market, you're going to have quite a high market price cap. Okay, we don't actually pay generators in this market just for being there, for providing capacity. Now that's being challenged quite a bit at the moment because of all of these issues I've been raising about system security. Questions are, should we actually be paying for capacity? I mean, in a way, we do have sort of a capacity market, not through design, but through intervention, because that's exactly what the South Australian government's done. They've actually made a decision to say, we're going to intervene in the market You know, we're not happy the market's delivering the energy security we think we're comfortable with to ensure our political survival. So we're going to make a decision and, you know, get some emergency generation in. And that's actually providing capacity, emergency capacity. But that's the idea. You know, in an energy-only market, you need a high price cap to signal new investment. But there hasn't really been much new investment coming in baseload. It's all been in renewables, which is to date being driven by, you know, the renewable energy target payments, etc.
Several decades ago, the state government had an organisation called ElectraNet, which had a lot of people who knew how to generate electricity to provide them with advice. And as I've said, most of the time it's pretty good advice. It's all gone. But who actually advises? Is it, you know, Premier and Cabinet, all their intelligence and schools? I would have thought doesn't have much energy knowledge in it. So how do they get there? Where do they get their knowledge from these days?
Sure. Well, first of all, I mean, the idea is that the market should... There is no central planning for generation. Okay, that's opposite to a market. We've got a national electricity market. The idea is that, you know, people who have money to invest will make decisions as to whether it's a good business proposition to bring a new generator into the market. So there is no centralised planning of generation. But having said that, you know, some of the recent reviews and everything, even the Finkel review is saying, you know, we perhaps need to give more thought to how we coordinate investment in generation and transmission. You know, one of the things and Premier and Cabinet do have some know-how about energy to give advice to the Minister, but they don't plan the network, they don't plan the system. No, they get advice as needed. So, I mean, you've heard of frontier economics, haven't you? Danny Price. He's mentioned in the media often. So he's a prime source of advice to the government at the moment on some of these matters.
You mentioned you have the big energy consumers like BHP connected directly to you. I was reading that there's going to be like extra incentives for you guys to help out when there's a shortage to back off their demand and they're going to get paid and get some sort of financial incentive. Do you have any updates on how that's going?
No, I don't, to be honest. I mean, that doesn't involve ElectraNet directly, but certainly, you know, demand side management is a great way of trying to shave the peaks in demand to avoid needing additional capacity. So I know that AMO is looking at something there as an initiative, but yeah, sorry, I can't give you an update on that. Yeah.
I'm interested in the location of the new big battery.
Yep.
Going near Jamestown. Did ElectraNet get a say in its location? And it seems to me to be based where the supply is rather than where the demand is. And I'm curious.
Okay. Well, look, I don't have full insight into the choice of the site, but I can give you my opinion. The government clearly was interested in delivering a battery very quickly. So, you know, they announced right from the beginning it was going to be in place by the 1st of December. Now, that's no mean feat, you know, from an announcement in March or April to get a 100 megawatt battery on the ground on the 1st of December operating. And of course, it hasn't happened yet, but, you know, I have reasonable confidence it'll get close. So they then went out to market and, you know, a couple of rounds, RFP, RFT, request for tender. And, you know, they would have looked at a number of factors. We were not involved in that decision-making process. We certainly have had some discussions and given government some advice about factors that they might want to consider and, you know, where on the network might be a site that you'd think about. There's a number of sites you could, but in the end, initially they were contemplating it could have been one big battery or it could have been 4 smaller ones, 1 times 100 or 4 times 25. But in the end, because of speed, you know, I think it was easier to go with one, and it was also easier to go with connecting it inside a wind farm rather than on the network itself. Just makes it easier from a sort of connection process point of view. You know, they had existing infrastructure there, made it a lot simpler. So if you're I shouldn't use those words, if you're really keen on delivering it so quickly, then you've got to think about what are all the ways that could bring me unstuck, that will prevent me from delivering it that quickly, and make sure that the solution I choose avoids those. And it was really a lot of that, I think, that went into that as well. But I'm sure there were other factors too.
Tell us the purpose of the battery. It's not to power the whole state for 20 seconds. And we don't know exactly why it's next to Hornsdale Wind Farm, but do you know what the purpose is?
Sure. Yeah, look, I mean, it has a number of purposes. Initially, when the government announced it, they said it was all about energy security. And in particular, they were concerned about events like occurred on the 8th of February. Remember, that was when we had to experience 45 minutes of load shedding because there wasn't enough supply to meet demand. So I think that event very much drove how they were thinking about the battery initially. And if you think about it, there would have been enough capacity there to cover 45 minutes of whatever demand needed to be shed. But since then, if you read now what the government's saying about the battery, it's not just about energy security, it's also about power system security. So energy security means just having enough generation to meet demand, enough supply to meet demand. Power system security refers more to the matters I was discussing with you earlier about system security. So if you've got a 100 megawatt battery, and we did have a major imbalance between supply and demand, say supply was short because we'd lost the interconnector or a major generator had tripped off. The battery, if it's about making sure we have stability for the first seconds, the battery can quickly inject its power to minimise the mismatch between supply and demand and help the system remain stable. So it has that purpose as well, that stated purpose as well. And as well as that, for the wind farm itself, it can shift energy over time. So, the wind farm operator may choose to, instead of sending some of its wind out at times, to put it in the battery and then to discharge the battery at other times when it can make more money or what have you.
Hopefully a simpler question. Going back to the 28 and the towers that fell over, if Port Augusta was still producing, would that have cut off the power coming from Port Augusta for those towers? Or do you have enough towers that would still be able to bring the power down?
It would have. We have 4 transmission circuits between Adelaide and Port Augusta on 3 sets of towers. So 3 separate lines, 4 circuits. One's a double circuit line. On that day, the double circuit line, which is the more modern one, is the one that lost 3 or 4, 5 towers that actually made a difference to those wind farms tripping off. One circuit stayed on, and then another one that's sort of an older one had multiple towers down, but they went down after the system black event. So power could have still got through, is the short answer. No, well, you would have got a good amount of it down there, yeah. Sorry? Well, many people have asked if Northern Power Station was still there, would the event have occurred the way it did? And, to me, the key thing was we lost a major amount of generation. So that would have still happened whether Northern Power Station was there or not. The wind farms, because of the unknown setting in their software that no one knew about, they would have still tripped off. That imbalance occurred. Look, I should just mention to you that a lot of things have changed since the 28th of September. If people are interested, there's a whole stack of reports on this event. I'd start with the Australian Energy Market Operator report that's on their website. Gives you a lot of detail. But some of the recommendations in their report have already been acted upon now. Others are in the process of being acted upon. I think a key one is the way that AEMO itself has changed its behaviour. It's being much more cautious in how it operates the network now. So, for example, whenever we have a bad weather event coming now, when there's forecasts for bad weather, and we've seen it recently in the last month, you can actually see on the market systems that they will introduce a limit on the interconnector flow. So they'll leave some headroom. So the system is more robust. So if you did lose major generation, there's more capacity to soak that up over the link without tripping the interconnector. So that's a sort of a change in operating procedure, if you like, that's been put in place, and a number of others like that. That's one example. So I think these events are very rare. They do happen. They're very low risk, but once in a while they will happen, and then the important thing is that you learn from them and you seek to put in place measures to minimise the chances of those things happening again. But usually when something really bad happens, it's beyond planning to avoid it. It's a combination of things that have to go wrong together for something like that to occur, and we see it all over the world. Major blackouts like that, when they occur, it's not just because one thing went wrong, it's because there was a combination of unlikely things that all happened at one time. Right at the back, and then
Sorry, are you okay for 2 more questions?
Sure. So that's a difficult choice then, who should... All right, the guy right at the back, and then one in front there maybe. Yes.
And how progressive is the cost-effective battery?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So pumped storage, of course, is a traditional technology. There's been quite a lot of work to look at that in South Australia. Again, the ARENA, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, and there's a couple of the universities, I think the ANU in particular has been quite active in this area. They've actually done quite a bit of work to survey potential sites for pumped storage in South Australia, and you can get that information online. And there's of course one particular proponent up north there near Korte, so just near Port Augusta on the way to Whyalla, that is pushing forward very strongly with a proposal for a couple of 100 megawatt type of generator pumping seawater up. Now, they're just at the stage of doing a feasibility study, but they're really talking up their project. Whether the economics work out for them, I can't predict. But, we wait with interest to see how that pans out. But clearly, pumped storage would be a great technology in South Australia to help with some of the challenges we're talking about, because, it's very much a traditional synchronous machine that you can put on that. Yes. Yep. Yeah, well, look, all of those things are happening. Certainly on the electric vehicles, even in our planning, we're taking that into account. All the demand forecasts for electricity over 10, 20 years, take into account assumptions about the take-up of electric vehicles and how they'll be used. So that is coming into our planning. I mean, there are many people that are looking at the sort of concept you talked about, sort of microgrids, where you might have neighbourhoods that are connected together. This is happening a lot in new developments. where people are having a look at that. So those things will all happen, no question. What was your middle question? Oh yes, the hot water. Yeah, well that's a story in itself actually, because but you know, historically we've had that hot water peaking, that hot water load come on all at the same time at 11 o'clock at night or something like that. And now it creates a bit of an issue because it makes this huge bump. But that's all being taken care of, and I think if it isn't already dealt with, it will be very soon. It's all being spread out a little bit so it doesn't happen at precisely the same time. But you know, again, this is just one of those things that was never a problem, but with the changing world it becomes something you need to deal with. Okay, it looks like Alan wants to wrap up.
Thank you, Raina. That was a great presentation. It's refreshing to hear someone who can use the term synchronous inertia and actually knows what it means. And that was really appreciated by the vast majority of us. I think we could keep going till midnight, but thank you very much for that. Now, Philip Tomney. Philip, would you like to come up and tell us quickly about the autonomous vehicle survey?
Good evening. Just for a bit of preamble so you know what this is going to be about, because I don't want to keep you from the pub or whatever any longer than you need to. I'm working at, which one? Left hand? What, to go up? Yep. To go forward? Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm doing a project at Adelaide Uni. I finished a degree last year, so I'm probably about the most mature student they've got in environmental policy management, and I thought I want to do something useful about it. And last year I was studying autonomous vehicles or driverless vehicles, and I'm particularly interested in what the effect's going to be of fully driverless vehicles. So that's all I'm looking at. The transition period is going to be potentially a nightmare, so I don't want to go there. And my interest was stimulated because of the 30-year plan for Greater Adelaide, and that's what I'll go into now, and whether these things are going to help what Adelaide's trying to do, or whether they could potentially hinder it. Okay, you got the full thing. Cool. A few questions. Anybody got any ideas on these? When we'll first see them? I'll just throw out a date, and I'll tell you what I've been reading. Although it'll be much more fun to be interactive. So, when do you think we might first see them on the road?
About 3 years ago.
Yeah, a lot of people said that, didn't they? When do you think they'll be sold in volume? What's the prediction? Good guess, yeah. I've seen 2035, and it's a complete piece of string, of course. But people are saying that potentially by 2035, and it obviously depends on whether you allow these things to come in or not, but by 2035 there may be 75% of all cars sold. And there's particular reasons for that, and mostly because we probably won't be buying them. It'll be big organisations of shared taxis and shared vehicles will be buying them, and we'll just be using the facility. And that's where this prediction comes from. Can I just suggest at the moment, all I'm doing is throwing out what I'm finding, and I think probably for the sake of the audience, it might be best not to have a debate. I'd love to talk to anybody afterwards. Yeah, and to me that's scary, because that's huge amounts of Adelaide's revenue potentially just going straight offshore, but that's just my view. So when will they dominate is another interesting debate, because there's the argument has already begun, I don't know if anybody else has seen it, that says effectively once these things become safer than us driving, probably we'll be banned from driving and we'll be banned from making cars that can be driven.
I think it's going to be tied up with the Internet of Things. Really.
Yeah, exactly, and that's a massive problem. So that's the questions. The 30-year plan for Greater Adelaide, I hope some people are familiar with it. It's all about accommodating population growth in the most environmentally sustainable way. And what they're saying is they want to use transit-oriented development. Is that a familiar term to you guys? Yeah, TOD, put lots of houses close to public transport so that people are happy to walk there and use the bus. And that, of course, has benefits in terms of health and in terms of reducing the number of cars on the road. reducing congestion and so on, which we got there. Constrained sprawl, because there's a recognition, of course, that our farmland is very valuable and what it produces, particularly to South Australia. And in fact, it's my view from what I've been looking at that potentially our farmland becomes less productive, so we do need to retain it. And foster the industry. We've all seen Jay get mostly, hugely excited about the idea of the employment that can be gained from fostering. I see shaking heads. From fostering the autonomous vehicle industry. Okay, that's a statement from the plan, which says our new compact urban form will be supported by continued improvements to our public transport systems, supported by ride-sharing initiatives, electric vehicles, emerging technologies such as driverless cars. Interestingly, that's all it says. That's the only place in the plan that says anything. Now, the associated plan with that is the Integrated Transport and Land Use Policy Plan. And I find that quite interesting because it says nothing at all about driverless vehicles. So I infer from that they're really not giving a huge amount of thought, and that's why I'm a bit bothered. Okay. Has everybody seen Cedric? That's Cedric. Cedric is VW's concept car, which they showed at Geneva, I think, this year. And it has no controls whatsoever, which is how we expect a fully driverless car to look eventually. These, I was going to suggest let's try and discuss this, but I don't think it's point in doing it because you've probably seen all these, but that's the claimed benefits for driverless vehicles. Okay, improved safety, we've all heard about that. Something like 90+% of all accidents are put down to human error. Reduced congestion, of course, if they drive closer together or if they're smaller, which is what a lot of people are predicting. We get better use of road space, less cost on infrastructure. Reduce parking space because they'll take themselves off and park somewhere else rather than in the city, so we get freed up real estate. New user cohort, which is obviously great for probably most of us actually, including me. But when we get so old and decrepit, we'll be able to get in one of those and they'll still drive us around. And the employment productivity and reduced travel costs. The prediction there is that because we probably won't want to buy these things, we'd rather just use them when we use them. And this comes back to the fact that you probably already know. Most of our cars sit idle for something like 90+% of the time. We drive it to work, we leave it in a car park, we drive it home again. My car's pretty much like that. And so the idea of shared cars says, why don't we use them productively for that other time and let somebody else use it? And similarly with what they call taxi bots, which is shared taxis. Sorry, I'm going to fall over in a second. There's a prediction there that they'll be virtually the same price as public transport. And of course, then again, it becomes very popular to use them. Okay. Sorry?
How do you see them creating employment? There'll be less taxi drivers.
Yeah, can I?
Cars will be built by robots.
You've jumped a slide for me. Thank you. As I say, I hasten to add these are claimed benefits, and that's really important. The risks of autonomous vehicles. Anybody want to throw out any of the risks that you've heard about?
Yes, I can't handle kangaroos.
Nice one. Yeah, the kangaroo thing came up about 3 months ago, didn't it? Go on.
Your privacy.
Privacy?
Yeah.
Privacy or security?
No, privacy. The system knows where you go.
Oh, that's one that's a bit of a worry to some people, isn't it? Anything else?
Yes, we mustn't discount human psychology, where we need possession and ownership of these vehicles, so there won't be these.
You're talking about the South Australian love of the car, aren't you? Yes, yeah. Does everybody realise that the South Australia is the greatest population of car owners in Australia? We hold that record and the least amount of public transport use. So somebody else?
But ours are the oldest cars.
Sorry?
Ours are the oldest cars.
Yeah, there is that too, yes. Yeah. Somebody else?
Hackers.
Hacking, yes.
Might not be much good on bush roads.
Possibly, yeah, good point. Okay. I may have a few more for you here. One of the big concerns that I personally have, and that's why I'm doing this, is that there's a prediction that says because they'll be so popular and because there'll be this huge new cohort of users, such as maybe mums that say, oh, well, little Billy wants to go to school. I'm not going to bother driving him. I'll just order one of these and it'll take him to school. Lots of older people who've got plenty of spare time, don't need to drive the car, so they don't worry about getting tired, can go on great long journeys. The prediction is maybe up to 90% more vehicle miles travelled than today. Now, when you think about that and congestion, it kind of says, well, maybe we've got the same problem generated out of this. And as I say, the time in use that's the shared vehicles thing. Rather than 6%, and most of the time they're sitting idle, you'll hear people say, oh, there'll be far fewer vehicles because we'll be sharing the same vehicle. But in fact, it'll be the same vehicle moving around per 90% of the time. So, you know, the number of vehicle movements will be just as bad. BITRE, the Bureau of Infrastructure Technology, something, predict that potentially, they're saying the congestion will be pretty much the same. At the moment, avoidable congestion costs in South Australia are 1.1 billion per annum. At the moment, BITRE are saying that by 2030, that will be 2.3 billion. So they're not kind of seeing it getting much better at the moment, which is about the same time that we said maybe these things are on the road. What about buses? You know, if a taxi bot is just as cheap as a bus, but it'll pick you up from your door and deliver you to where you want to go, rather than you having to walk to the bus stop and walk at the other end, there's not much of an incentive to use the bus. Employment impact, thank you for that, sir. PricewaterhouseCoopers identified 95,000 jobs at risk in Australia from driving jobs, okay? The ADVI, Australian Driverless Vehicle Initiative, that's based here in Adelaide and working with Flinders, came up with 7,500 new jobs created. Now I sat and I thought, okay, there's 95,000 driving jobs going. What about the people that insure these cars? Because we won't need them anymore. What about the body shop repairer guys who do that? We don't need them anymore, et cetera, et cetera. And I came up with 130,000. Sorry?
Traffic fines.
Absolutely, traffic fines. You raised such an enormous question there. Yes, how on earth do we pay for the roads in the future? So I'll go away. Continuing sprawl is obviously a concern, because if you can work while you're commuting in your car, then do you really care if you live close to the city, and or would you prefer to go and live further afield, maybe much further afield, and just work on your way to work? These are all things that academic researchers are coming up with, not me. I am one to an extent, but I'm nothing like the real researchers. But these are all the things they're coming up with. And the public health impact. Excuse me, let me just throw inactive travel. There was a job done, some research done by the Commonwealth of Australia a couple of years ago. Inactive travel at the moment is costing Australia $13.8 billion a year. And Lancet, interestingly, the medical research organisation came up with the fact that if you can get people to start walking, for every kilometre they walk saves the health system $1. Okay, $1 a kilometre.
Might also be transferring the energy needs from diesel and electric to electricity too. So there's a network.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. This is huge. That's the sort of things I'm coming up with. So I thought, well, I think this is the next slide. Yes, let's try and compare the desires of the 30-year plan with these potential impacts, and do they help or hinder? And I've come up with that. It's fairly brief. Yes, there's lots and lots of potential benefits. Please don't think I'm a Luddite. You know, I quite like the idea, and I think there's an inevitability about it. But I'm concerned that, you know, if active travel doesn't go up, we don't get that health benefit. We don't get the healthcare costs going down. If the vehicle movements are going up by 90%, we don't really save the congestion. Yes, we save, with electric vehicles, we save that kind of issue, but the road wear is the same. I wonder how on earth we'll ever cross the road. You know, if you've got twice the number of vehicles moving around, and they're all moving in these platoons. I don't know if most people have probably heard about platoons, which means they all run very close together. You know, are we going to step off the curb, or do we have to wait for them to decide to create a gap for us? The government wants to reduce sprawl. Does it reduce sprawl? Potentially not. And does it stimulate new employment? And we've already covered that. So what I'm trying to do is measure public attitudes, because I think public attitudes give us a clue as to how enthusiastically these will be absorbed. And these are the reasons why. You cannot prove any of these benefits. There's a federal study going on at the moment, some of you may be aware of, into the impacts of driverless cars. The UK did it over their last winter, and they reported in March. And that was essentially their conclusion. Nothing can be proven, much more work needs to be done. Not that they're saying it shouldn't happen, but you know, that there's lots of risks. Yes, sir?
Are you aware of what's happening at Tonsley with
the shuttle? Yeah. Yeah, it's a great idea, and there's one running in Perth, as I'm sure you know about, and there's going to be the one to the Longstay car park in Adelaide. All over the world, these projects are going. Yes. Yeah, to run across the campus.
Yeah, but
yes.
Also going up to Flippers and across the Marion shopping centre.
Yes. Yeah. That's right. And I think that'll be really good, because at least we'll get some experience of it. But the concern I have is that because you can't prove these things, and because there's nothing demonstrable, like climate change, this is a wicked problem. We don't know the impact, we don't know the timescales, we don't know where it's going to happen, so we can't predict in any kind of conventional way. And the answer to wicked problems, if anybody's been involved in climate change adaptation, is people. People have the answers, because they know how to fix these things. And that really brings me right back to my starting point, which is I want to know what people think about this. And I would love for you to do that survey. It's available on my own little web page. And if you write it down and do it and send it to anybody else that you like, I would love to know what you think. The survey simply is completely anonymous. Nobody will know that you did it. I don't even know your computer's ID when you do it. But I would dearly love everybody to do it, because I'm trying to get as many views as I possibly can. Yes, sir?
Is that website available through ATA? Like if I go to ATA
I've asked Alan if we could do it.
I can get head office to put it on. I can't send an email out to people about it. Eric?
Eric's done it, yes. Thank you, Eric.
The AEV, the Adelaide
electric vehicle.
I'll put it on the front page of our website.
So it's what?
Eric? It'll be on the ATA webpage as well.
If you just look up electric vehicles Adelaide, you'll see it at Google.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Sorry. Say?
Has anything been done on the carbon impact of the production of it?
No, not to my knowledge. No, I'm interested in the social problems it's likely to cause us, rather than the technical problems, which is. Sorry, I agree with you. What I'm talking about. When I say social, I mean literally to our city infrastructure and the way we live in the city. Shall I wind up there?
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Philip. Quick reminder, Sunday the 17th of September from 10 o'clock in the morning till 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Sustainable House Day, managed excellently by the ATA at long last. Maggie's house is open at Linton, Seaview Road, Linton. Oh yes, Catherine and John's house at Gilberton is open as well. Any other houses open? No. Yeah. Maxine, you got a tale from Library Corner.
We generally have Sanctuary available for sale, and the current issue, which is
Thanks, Maxine. So if you're a new member, and I hope it wasn't you asking impertinent questions, go and grab an old renew from Catherine and Maxine. Our next meeting will be November the 20th, when we hope we'll have a presentation about electric vehicle infrastructure. So until then, we're supposed to vacate this room at 9:30, but give or take 5 minutes. Have a cup of tea and a chocolate biscuit. Bye.